Okay, so the project for today is to reinforce the lower hinge on the door. And this is apparently a common problem. Jim Bounds did a video on this a while back that I watched, and he talked about how the weakest point on the entire body is the lower hinge on the door. And I don't remember this being a problem when we purchased the coach, but it's definitely a problem now. And so, from watching his video and doing a little bit of research, I think I have a reasonable solution that I can do to strengthen this and make it better, and maybe prevent having to do some more major repairs for a while. So, if you look at the bottom hinge here, when I open up the door and lift the door a little bit, you can see quite a bit of twisting between the hinge and the door. So you can see that hinge twisting back and forth. And we'll come around to the other side and see what the cause for that is. All right, so the problem is pretty easy to see here. There are all of these cracks around the two bolts that attach the hinge to the door frame. So the hinge comes in through the outer shell, and on the inside of this right here, and then these bolts screw into, I assume that there must be bolts that are part of the hinge itself. So the hinge must be threaded that these go into. From some of the research that I've done, the best way to fix this is to take the door all apart and weld a new piece of aluminum in place here to strengthen this all up. What I'm going to do is use a plate, and this is aluminum, and I got some that is 1/16 of an inch thick. There's also ones that are a little bit thicker, so 1/8 of an inch, and I hope that this will be thick enough to reinforce it. But I'm going to drill a couple of holes that these bolts can go through, and I'll basically just sandwich this piece of aluminum over the top of this cracked portion here, and that should give these bolts a firm enough surface to bolt up against and keep this solid so that it doesn't flex and break out this aluminum frame any more than it already is. I may need to grind off the heads of these bolts a little bit so that they don't bind up with the other bolts, but I'm going to wait until I put in this plate to make sure that I need to do that. All right, so I got the plate bolted up, and my overall dimensions of my plate are 3.5 inches tall, and the holes that I drilled are about 13/32, and they're on about 1.25 inch center. When I say about, I'm not a machinist, and so my measurements are approximate, but that should be pretty close to what you need. As far as the width, I used 1.25 inch aluminum stock, and I already mentioned that this is 1/16 of an inch thick. So I was a little bit worried that something this thin may not hold up very well or may not be strong enough, but I think sandwiched against this frame of the door, it's going to be okay. One of the things I was worried about was these bolts binding up with these bolts as we close the door. There's also some concern about this hinge that we have for our screen door. So I don't have that installed on the bottom right now. I need to do some repairs to the screen door before I can do that. But I can see marks here where these bolts have been hitting this hinge. And so I want to be careful about having some space between the bolts on the door and the bolts on the body. So I did check the spacing on these. You can use a little bit of clay. I used some gum and stuck it on here to make sure that I had good clearance between these bolts and these others. And so I think I'll be okay when I put the hinge for the screen door on here. But I may actually end up grinding the heads off of these bolts. They have a little bit of a crown around the outside, it wouldn't cause any problems to grind that off. There's still plenty of bolt for if I have to remove these at any point. But for today, that tightened up very nicely. When I now move the door, it does not wiggle at all. And so that hinge on the other side is not moving at all. So I think I'm getting pretty good reinforcing there. The closing has got a lot better too. So before, you had to give this a pretty good slam, and I could see some wear happening on the top of the striker. And so that was part of my clue that there was something wrong, is that the door was getting harder to close and I was seeing that wear on the striker. Now it closes much more easily and closes nice and tight, opens up easily. You can even just kind of push on it and it latches down nicely. So I think we're in pretty good shape. I think this fix is pretty much done. I do want to touch up the paint. So I have some paint that I think will match the inside of this. I'm just going to touch up what I did here so that it blends in a little bit better. But other than that, I think we're all done.